Hi.
Okay,
So nice to meet you.
I'm
I'm Amber Energy healer and tarot.
um,
I
the way that my
gifts
gifts work is that somebody will typically be brought into my awareness, and when that happens, it is my job, I guess, to bring whatever message needs to be brought to their awareness to help them heal. So yeah, just this is going to be my free reading for you. Any service that I provide for you will be free because that's the way I do it. When I get an actual message for a person rather than them coming to ask me for it. So yeah, let me get started so I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so first I'm going to do a little bit of a reading on your current just life in general, like situationship, I guess, that you've got going on. Okay, so okay, so it does look like you're kind of torn between making a choice between sticking with what you are currently doing and starting a new project of some sort. Specifically, possibly a job that you're debating between, or some type of like new form of income. It looks like recently you could have been struggling with some type of like a one-sided charity, if that makes sense. You're carrying a lot of like the burden. But you've also been needing to keep and maintain some boundaries. That could be with other people or within yourself. It could be having to do with your actual persistence towards whatever this one-sided charity was. You really you've been mastering your area of employment, though, and that's making you pretty happy. However, you're bored. You're bored and you're tired of focusing so much on money, and you want to experience the world. You want to figure out a new creative outlet that you could use your abilities and your skills in that would bring you more joy and give you more time for maybe relationships and things. Okay, so let me break this down for you a little bit on what I do in case you don't know what it is. Energy healing is, actually I've got some sample papers. Energy has to do with your chakra system, essentially. However, sorry for the rustling papers, hold on. However, it is not necessarily only the chakras that I deal with. Personally, I feel that everything was meant to be combined. I can't find my paper, but everything was meant to be combined. When I say this, I mean psychology, Western medicine, like modern medicine, energy medicine, and also like obviously your physical health and your spiritual connection. Okay, I am a very firm believer that everything should be united to bring balance, because that's why it's all available. It's because energy doesn't ever disappear or get added, it just gets displaced and replaced. Okay, so what happens with our body if we have a blockage of some sort, like an emotional blockage? That's usually the biggest issue. If there's an emotional blockage, then what we're dealing with is on our meridian lines, which is the Holy Spirit, I guess you would say, or the life force energy, or the chi that runs through your body. We have these meridian lines. Okay, each of these is governed by a different organ system and also a different emotional system. Okay, if there's a blockage in these meridians, then what you'll have is actually a blockage causing a manifestation of an injury or an illness. If it is something temporary, right, like a fleeting emotion that you had from like a breakup, something like that, that is just everyday life, or a letdown at your work or something like that. Getting scared when you're driving somewhere because somebody almost hits you but they didn't, like things like that. They can cause like temporary blockages. If a temporary blockage happens, then it's usually something that'll clear itself out. If it doesn't clear itself out, then what you have is like your moderate injuries. Your moderate injuries are going to be hitting your funny bone, stubbing your toe, getting a paper cut, feeling a little bit nauseous before you go into a place, getting a stuffy nose, headaches, etc. Okay, negative self-talk, slight paranoia, etc., anxiety. All right. So, if you don't have the emotion leave naturally like it's supposed to, then what it will level up to is going to be something more pertinent that you would pay attention to. The reason for this is because the whole reason that it's happening is not as a punishment or anything like that. It's because our subconscious needs to talk to our conscious. Our inner child, I'm sure you've heard, needs to talk to our adult selves. And our inner brains also, your heart brain, your gut brain, they need to communicate with this brain. Okay, so that's what the injuries happen for. The issue with this is that people weren't taught this because of Western modern medicine. So when your subconscious needs to communicate to you, for instance, that you are you feel really uneasy about a situation, you don't feel comfortable about it, you'll feel nauseous, you don't feel stable in your footing, basically. If somebody's forcing you to do something, like say you do something and you're not proud of it, for instance, like you're running a marathon or you're playing soccer. Okay, I'll do the soccer thing. You're playing soccer, right? And you go to kick the ball and you know that you're gonna miss. Like it just like slips off the front of your toe almost, like and you just know you didn't nail it. You'll probably end up with a twisted ankle. because of the thought process that happens behind this is, crap, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done it this way. Or, oh, I messed up. I wish I didn't go this way. You're doubting your direction in life at that moment. If you're somebody who is doubting your direction in life because of logic, or because of the fact that maybe your dad was the coach, or your coach is a man and he's yelling at you, or you are embarrassed that you messed up in front of your male friends or your son or something, then it's going to be on your right ankle that the twist happens. If it's something to do with your emotional self, like you feel like you let yourself down, you feel like you let the team down, you are worried about your mom, or your mom was somebody that was the cause because you were late for practice or something on the day that you learned how to do those kicks, maybe. If you are embarrassed because your girlfriend's watching, or, things like that, your coach is a girl, then, or you feel like your partner didn't pass it to you the right way intentionally, so that's going to be an emotional issue and an intuitive issue and a creative issue. And so that's going to happen to your left ankle. So those are just some examples. If you get a paper cut and it is on your right hand, on your index finger, it's going to have to do with something that you were leading others with, or something that you were meant to be a leader of others during, and you didn't feel comfortable with the way that you were doing it, or you felt forced to do it. If it's on the left finger, on the index finger, it's going to be something that you were leading yourself to do, and you feel like you didn't pull through for yourself. Like you had to be up at a certain time for work, and then you were a little bit late, and then you get into the office, and then you're a little bit late for that meeting, and now you've got nobody to blame but yourself, and then you go and you're trying to go through your papers really quickly to get the paper out, the form to give to your boss, and you get a paper cut on your index finger. That would be an example, okay? So now that that's clear, we can also have, if we don't address them then, we will level up again, and that'll become a chronic injury or illness. And from there, if it still doesn't get addressed, it will become something that is terminal, or something that will actually just take our lives, like a car accident, like a fatal car accident, or like somebody getting killed by somebody else, things like that. Okay. The way that we die and the way that we get terminally ill is also affected by that same system. So there's a lot to learn about individuals depending on things like that. For instance, I can tell you Brian Laundrie was more likely than not very abused. He was very controlling of himself, not so much other people, but he did feel like other people affected his environment the wrong way. He was very much abused, though, which caused him to get into that mindset of needing to be in constant control of his appearance to other people, basically. Also, we can learn with your situation. Sorry. I was getting an info. Okay, so with your situation, hold on 1 second. Okay. With your information, or with your situation, I mean, what I believe it has to do with, so far, I haven't actually done a full reading on it, that's what this video is going to be for, but what I've picked up on it, and what I know about what I do know about, you're dealing with issues with feeling like there's, okay, well, let me start from the beginning. I noticed that you were looking tired under your eyes only because somebody had pointed it out. That is very telling. having dark circles under your eyes or bags under your eyes, even if it is just from being tired at that moment, it's triggered by an emotion, okay? It's triggered by having unshed tears, basically. If you are somebody who's over 30 and this happens, then it's something that happened previously in a very distant past, so childhood, adolescent years maybe, which you were not able to grieve the proper way for, and you felt like you had to choke your emotions in. You've dismissed it since then, more likely than not. And then in your 30s, something happened that you had to do this again, which triggered some type of memory or connection with that previous event. An example of this would be a lady having her nephew commit suicide, and she has to support her sister, obviously, during this. Even though she's really upset, she chokes back her tears and she tries to stay strong for her sister's sake so that her sister can grieve and get the full attention that she needs. During this time, her sister is also pregnant. This same lady, when she was in her 30s, had a child who died. So the sister's pregnancy triggers the memory of her child that had passed away and causes her to be choking back the tears for a new situation while subconsciously being triggered by that old situation without even realizing it. In which case, she's going to end up getting dark circles and bags under her eyes while she's going through this process, or while it's in her awareness, or her lack of awareness, I guess you'd say. I don't know how to, like, her subconscious awareness, okay? So that's an example of that. As far as with your heart issue, let me double check what it was called. I'm sorry, 1 second. So I just reviewed what I was able to pick up about your situation, and I realized it's not very much. But what I can tell you is this, that issues with your heart have to do with your spiritual connection and your ability to spread it outwardly in the physical realm. It has to do with love. It also has to do with grief. It has everything to do in between that has anything to do with love or hate or anything like that. It is basically your emotional powerhouse that is a portal for your spiritual connection and your divine love to be spread. Okay. Your unconditional love for yourself and everything else. If you're having heart palpitations, possibly like a high heart rate or whatever, or imbalance or whatever, if it happens for like 3 or 4 times a week, it could be something that's just passing. If it's happening more than that, you're more likely than not going through a spiritual ascension. Okay, or awakening. Okay, so when it comes to your situation, I did notice that you said something about post-COVID. And if that's the case, then it's really funny because, well, not funny, sorry, no offense, but it's interesting because I've been actually working on a theory about COVID because I'm very adamant that I know what the issue is here and what the whole purpose of it was. So, of course, it would be very suiting that you would be brought into my awareness so that I could spread this message, maybe. So I'm just going to play a video right now for you that has to do with a woman who did a TED Talk who she has been experiencing symptoms from COVID for about a year or maybe longer. I'm not really sure, but I'm just going to watch it at the same time that you watch it. So I'm going to just play it here on the screen, and then I'll give you my feedback on it afterward. And then, yeah. So, 1 second.
I have two daughters, both born naturally and without an epidural. And I'm not telling you this to make you squeamish, but to highlight that I'm not a lightweight when it comes to pain. So when I say that COVID-19 was the worst pain that I've ever experienced in my life, I'm not exaggerating. COVID-19 almost killed me several times. And before you think, surely this woman must be sickly or had pre-existing health conditions prior to spring of 2020, I will also share with you that I had none. I'm a person who's never really sick. I don't get the flu each year. I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm not a heavy drinker. I eat healthy. I exercise regularly. I have no autoimmune diseases. My genetics are strong. My great-great-grandmother lived to be 98. My great-great-grandfather 103. My great-grandmother 99. My grandmother would still be alive today had she not lost her battle with I have two daughters, both born naturally and without an epidural. And I'm not telling just kept getting sicker. At one point, I have two daughters, both born naturally and without an epidural. And I'm not telling you this to make you squeamish, but to highlight that I'm not a lightweight when it comes to pain. So when I say that COVID-19 was the worst pain that I've ever experienced in my life, I'm not. And before you think, surely this woman must be sickly or had pre-existing health conditions prior to spring of 2020, I will also share with you that I had none. I'm a person who's never really sick. I don't get the flu each year. I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm not a heavy drinker. I eat healthy. I exercise regularly. I have two daughters, both born naturally and without an epidural. And I'm not telling you this. And I'm not telling you this. I have have 2 daughters, both born naturally and without an epidural. And I'm not telling you this to make you squeamish, but to highlight that I'm not a lightweight when it comes to pain. So when I say that COVID-19 was the worst pain that I've ever experienced in my life, I'm not exaggerating. COVID-19 almost killed me several times. And before you think, surely this woman must be sickly or had pre-existing health conditions prior to spring of 2020, I will also share with you that I had none. I'm a person who's never really sick. I don't get the flu each year. I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm not a heavy drinker. I eat healthy. I exercise regularly. I have no autoimmune diseases. My genetics are strong. My great-great-grandmother lived to be 98. My great-great-grandfather, 103. My great-grandmother, 99. My grandmother would still be alive today had she not lost her battle with COVID-19. My doctors describe me as being medically boring. You should also know I'm a professor and social epidemiologist. So given that I'm a health expert, I was surprised when doctors showed a pattern of not listening to me and not believing me when I came to them for help. But that's exactly what happened. When I initially got sick back in March 2020, I knew something was wrong. But I didn't think it was COVID-19. I didn't fit the description. I was young and fit. But knowing what we know now about COVID-19 and looking back, I had just taken a trip from Amsterdam to Paris, and I was on one of the last flights allowed back into the U.S. There were sick people on my flight. There was a guy coughing the whole way. I only saw 2 people wearing masks, and I was not one of them. When I landed, the TSA workers were not wearing masks. They had a pile of PPE gear piled on the desk, unopened. My plane landed on March 2nd of 2020, and roughly 10 days later, I started experiencing my first symptoms. My husband, daughters, and I were all sick at about the same time for about a week, but I just kept getting sicker. At one point, it felt like an elephant had sat on my chest, and I thought, oh my, am I having a heart attack? I called my doctor and he prescribed a Z-Pack. Later that night, I experienced my first bout of chills, and that's when my COVID-19 roller coaster ride first began. Very quickly in those first few weeks, my list of symptoms became a mile long, but doctors didn't believe that I had COVID-19. By the 3rd week of March, I went to the ER for the first time for severe shortness of breath. I got tested for the flu and COVID-19. I had one of the first non-FDA approved tests in Texas, and my test came back negative. So that's one of the reasons doctors thought I didn't have COVID-19. But I knew something was wrong, so I was asking myself, had these doctors never heard of false negatives? Surely something was wrong with me. My actual test results had a warning label on them that said, if the test comes back negative, you need to take the entire patient's history into account. In March, a few days after going to the ER the first time, I landed again in the ER for severe shortness of breath. And the doctors said to me, you don't have COVID-19 because you don't have a fever. And the CDC symptom list says you have to have a fever to have COVID-19. The nurse treating me said, I've been doing this for 30 years. She looked straight at me. She took her mask off and said, you're not going to die. You have blood clots, not COVID-19. After they did my CT scan, checking for blood clots, and it came back negative, all masks were on when they returned to the room. I never had a positive COVID-19 test, and I never had a fever, but my oxygen levels would drop regularly below 80%. And sometimes at night, it would even get down as low as 67%. After being released from the ER, I followed up with my PCP provider in April, and when I told her that at night, sometimes my oxygen levels would drop down to 67%, she told me that that wasn't possible and that my oximeter must be broken. I explained to her that it was not. And she said to me, "Ma'am, you don't have COVID-19. You have anxiety. It must be broken." Because in her words, and I quote, "Ma'am, your COVID-19 test came back negative." By April, for about a week, it seemed like things were looking up for me. I had seen a lung specialist who had prescribed me an anti-inflammatory medication that I'm sure saved my life. So it's hard for me to be upset with him about the fact that when I came to his office with my husband, he spoke with my husband instead of me. It was like I was a 9-year-old girl who had gone to the office visit with her father instead of a 38-year-old woman with a PhD. He ignored all of my other symptoms. He tapped on my chest for 2 seconds and then gave me a diagnosis of a respiratory illness. He then proceeded to prescribe me medication for anxiety and left the room. He's the same doctor who later prescribed me a prescription for oxygen at home, but I was the one who told him that I needed it, and I figured that out by accident because during my second visit to the ER, they put me on oxygen and I felt better. Later, news reports came out that oxygen helped patients with COVID-19. At this point, it was clear to me that it was patients and not doctors who were ahead of the curve with COVID-19. My lowest point came at the end of April. My mother and husband found me shaking with my eyes rolled back in my head, and I was rushed to the emergency room. And while there, doctors kept asking me again and again, had I taken any drugs? And I kept telling them no, I hadn't. But doctors didn't start treating me with compassion until my drug tests came back clean. And all the neurologist said to me when my MRI came back normal was that COVID-19 doesn't cause seizures, and my COVID-19 test was negative. But later on, news reports did indeed show that COVID-19 can trigger seizures, and it's the first known illness to break the blood-brain barrier. After that terrifying experience, I sat in a dark room with the curtains drawn. Light and sound hurt. The sound of laughter from my daughters hurt. There were times when I needed a cane to walk. COVID-19 had ravaged my body and left me with chronic fatigue. I had neurological problems so severe that at one point I didn't remember my daughter's birthdays, and I would forget what I was doing in the middle of whatever it is that I was doing. Now I want to remind you that even though my situation is a nightmare and COVID-19 is a novel virus, I'm not special. I am no different from the people who have been struggling for years with chronic diseases. It is estimated that 40% of Americans suffer from a chronic illness. One day they're healthy, and then they're not. Some of these illnesses torment people from birth to death. Others, like Lyme disease or fibromyalgia, are mysterious. Like COVID-19, you're healthy, and then you're not. I'm telling you this to remind you that given that 40% figure, any one of us at any time could get sick. So what I'm about to say next could apply to you. Research for mysterious chronic illnesses is underfunded, and that's terrible. But what's really worrying is the pattern of medical providers not believing their chronic disease and COVID-19 patients. It's a pattern of not believing and not giving their patients, especially female patients and patients of color, the benefit of the doubt. There is so much research on patients reporting doctors not believing them or not treating them with the same level of compassion. It's unbelievable. And as a health expert, I knew these alarming statistics going into it, but I didn't think it would happen to me. Let's be real for a moment. We all have biases, but doctors, same as with teachers, judges, police officers, they need to train themselves to drop those biases at the door when they enter their workplace. Doctors who practice medicine while still holding on to their biases or are simply burned out are violating the trust of their patients. And trust is a key element to the patient-physician relationship. It's time for all of the medical community, not just some, to move forward. Here's what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for my new male neurologist who did give me the benefit of the doubt. It was such a relief when everyone else I had encountered had discounted my situation. I'm also thankful for my new female lung doctor. She was the first doctor who actually took the time to look through my patient history. And when I told her about what happened to me with my first lung doctor, she told me that almost 50% of her female patients have the same complaints. I'm also thankful for my new male cardiologist and gastrologist who, instead of thinking that I was on drugs or had anxiety, actually advocated for me to get the test that I needed. My new PCP doctor spent time talking with me about diabetes. She's the complete opposite of my first PCP doctor, who told me just to exercise more when my blood work came back flagged with diabetes. Clearly, she didn't know that COVID-19 is linked to diabetes and that COVID-19 and rigorous exercise doesn't mix. I'm lucky in that I could keep searching for compassionate doctors, but I know that not everybody has that luxury. Look, this pandemic has pushed doctors, nurses, and other frontline healthcare workers to the brink. And I have a documented history of being an avid supporter of first responders. And I believe that many deserve our deepest thanks and respect. But a lot of people with COVID-19 were sent away from hospitals or overlooked. And some of these people died because a doctor didn't believe them. COVID-19 has shown us that we need to have a serious discussion about the way medicine is practiced, especially in the face of the unknown. Doctors, on average, are an overachieving bunch. Otherwise, they would have never have made it so far educationally. And the worst thing for an overachiever to admit is that they don't know. But in the case of COVID-19, or the next unknown virus, doctors must learn to accept that it's okay to say, I don't know, that humility can save lives. From my perspective, listening and believing are the first steps in navigating the learning curve of a new illness. Making integrative medicine the norm is the next step. I am happy to report that I am a COVID-19 survivor. I don't like the label long hauler. It implies that I am in this for the long haul, and I am not. I am thankful that I can stand here today and say that I can get back to writing children's books with my daughters again, that I can read with them again, that I can dance with them again. I know there are so many women and men around the world who contracted COVID-19 and cannot say the same. Thank you.
Lindor, made to melt you by the Lindt Master Chocolatier.
Patty's flight.
Is what you often adjust to. Okay, cool. Sorry. I'm not pro at this. Okay, so that is COVID-19 is not the issue. The issue is the energetic system. Our subconscious communicates with our conscious about what is blocked or malfunctioning inside of us energetically. COVID-19 is a symptom, just like the individual symptoms are.
On an
on an
energetic
medicinal level, what we should be paying attention to. Check my sound.
Okay,
Cool.
I'm not
pro at this.
Okay, so that is
That is
because
because
COVID-19
COVID-19
is
is
not
not
the
the
issue.
issue.
The
The issue is the
energetic
energetic
system.
system.
Our
Our
subconscious
communicates with our conscious about what is blocked or
malfunctioning
malfunctioning inside of
us
us energetically.
COVID-19 is a
symptom,
just
just
like
like
the
the
individual
individual
symptoms
symptoms
are.
are.
On an
On an
energetic medicinal level,
level,
what
what
we should be paying attention to
is
is
the
the
symptoms.
symptoms. In
In
this
this
woman's
woman's
case, we
we
can
can
learn
learn
that the
that the heavy
feeling of an
elephant
elephant
on
on her
her
chest was
was
caused by a crowding or the
overpressurized
overpressurized
emotions
emotions
of living too closely
or
or having to experience a living environment too close or intermesh with others from whom
one
one
cannot
cannot get enough distance to be yourself,
can
can
trigger
a
sympathetic
sympathetic
response
from
from
the
lungs
lungs
and
and
bronchial
bronchial
airway,
leading to
asthmatic
asthmatic
pressure,
pressure, coughing,
respiratory
infections, and other
ailments.
ailments.
The
The
holistic
holistic
recommendation
recommendation
is for space
change,
restructuring one's lifestyle to allow breathing room and the permission to be yourself without constant stress from those around you. If water retention is involved, as in pneumonia or in the case of like COVID, how the fluid builds up, or emphysema, a
a
sympathy
sympathy
crisis, or excess of emotional concern, or from others is often involved. Okay, so most likely you're feeling responsible or guilty and worried severely because her kids and her hubby were sick. And even though she knew that she had a medical background, and she also had noticed. I lost my spot. Okay, so she also had noticed all of the sick people around her, like masks, coughing, people not using their PPE correctly. And even though, again, she was educated in medicine and health, she didn't feel able to socially distance or have a choice to get away from the risks, even though the things she loved were in danger of being affected, like her kids and her husband and herself. The trauma of feeling like you don't protect them enough when you were not one of the people wearing a mask on the plane, etc. Is what would have caused that heavy feeling. Because she couldn't get away from the people that she was forced to be in living quarters with. And also she felt awkward putting a mask on, or obligating your kids to put a mask on because nobody was doing it yet. So she would have felt like she was offending somebody. Okay, we can also learn that by her having shortness of breath, that it was caused because of her taking on too much. The extent of taking on more than you can cope with, also there would be usually a great difficulty in giving some of the burden back, or the responsibility back. Some shortness of breath will not admit to any limitation, even to themselves. And there is a very much a need to be stronger than they actually are, just to be loved by others. It's an internal like negative self-thought or something. They may want things to be done their way, and when this does not happen, an asthma attack is just the excuse you need to be not as strong as you seem. It's also
something that we can learn from this is that since it was compared to diabetes, that we are then dealing with an emotional conflict of resistance or withstanding or enduring a situation or person for a long time and combat readiness. Diabetes is actually one of the biggest risk factors for adults over 40, so I can also mention she's more likely not over 40. I'm talking about type 2 at this point, and it's different than type 1. But basically she was lacking. She was in an emotional isolation or isolated state. She was lacking sweetness in life, basically. The body starts to not be able to handle sugar because they can't connect with life sweetness. Sugar is basically symbolic of love and the love of life. Advice for something like that would be to stop worrying and get happy. Do what makes you happy and stop worrying about any burdens that's going on in life. Another issue is with diabetes, particularly is like high blood pressure. And that is literally the pressure of everybody love you. It's about the same idea as the asthma thing. The pressure to perform or to do tasks that you can't handle so that you can have love from others. And then starting to resent or get pushed away from the feeling of ever securing an emotional level, basically. Okay. So where was I? Okay, so diabetes is also the result of our psychological desire to experience the sweetness of life without expelling any effort. Because of the lack of interest in expelling effort to find that happiness, then we find that the earthly sweets of food, normally people start eating, trying to bring that pleasure and that joy and that endorphin rush to themselves. We start realizing that the sweetness of food is not satisfying enough. And this will oftentimes disrupt the ability to ingest them. We do this so that we will be compelled to discover the greater sweetness in life, which is our true spiritual nature. And to stop replacing it with those earthly desires or urges. Okay. We can also understand that the shaking was a validation of her initial spiritual feeling. And a reminder to call on love and light to protect her vibration so that she is able to stay in a state of love and joy. The idea of feeling repulsed by the light and noise to wake her up to the beauty of when it doesn't hurt. Forgetting the kids' names is a wake up to noticing what is the most important thing to her before it is lost. And seizures, when there's some kind of conflict around the movement or when going out of the body feels better than coming into the mind. In the moment of that battle or that conflict, it gets bumpy and it is essentially a fragmentation of the person's psyche, a feeling of soul loss while you are still living. The fact that there was no fever does in a way show that the body was not trying to fight the actual virus itself, meaning the test could have been telling the truth. Because the reason medically that we get a fever for things like this is because it's developing high temperature is part of the human body's natural way of supporting the immune system, part of the brain called the hypothalamus. May decide to regulate the body's temperature to a higher level, fighting off the infection and illness. But like I said, COVID-19 is not the illness. The symptoms are the illness. COVID-19 was just the easiest way to get our body to display the symptoms widely enough that people pay attention to them. But instead, since no one was ever taught this stuff, we all did the exact opposite instead. COVID-19 is not the issue. Like I said, the symptoms are not even really the illness either. The illness or the main issue is whatever message our inner self is trying to press to us so that we can correct it. This is the problem with diagnosing an illness physically. It limits your awareness and only gives you the chance to cure or treat the issue. It doesn't give a chance to heal the issue. With any injury or illness, scar or mole, pimple or bruise, even accident and thought patterns, we are being communicated with. And when we just treat the symptoms to cure it, it essentially is leaving us vulnerable to having it not come back and manifest physically as a chronic illness or a new injury in a place farther down the same energetic, emotional path in our radiant and chakra system. The message that COVID-19 symptoms are bringing to the world are an attempt to wake everyone up to the understanding that we are not living life out of love or out of self-worth or confidence and appreciation, that we are overworking, overpressurizing, overstressing, and need time to relax and stop to smell the flowers, to appreciate the gift we are blessed with, to stop caring about the physical differences or preconceived judgments and stereotypes, to stop living in fear of others, to learn to only be concerned about your own self and your own abilities, to use creativity to spark a desire for a higher spiritual understanding and connection, to show that love is not what provides success, but instead ingenuity and teamwork and confidence, to humble the world to cherish ourselves and each other, and to release the anger and resentment and burdens. Why do you think the whole world was shut down equally and people had to learn to share and trust during the supply shortages? We were given so much time to spend close to home, to be with our kids and families, and cover our faces with masks, forcing us to look like everyone else, to have to be confident in the words we spoke, to be able to articulate them clearly enough to be heard, and to eliminate the fear of stereotyped people, but instead give a chance to us to see if trust is there rather than assume that it is not, like we would have previously. For instance, can you imagine somebody going into a bank wearing a face cover about 4 years ago? A robbery would be reported, definitely. This is not only prevalent in COVID-19. The metaphysical explanation is available and useful in the true healing of any disease, including the ones listed in the video. She is right. Not enough research is available for these illnesses, and yes, these less research